As the last episode of Halo came to its expected flaming car crash and an ending, everything suddenly became crystal clear. The showrunners obviously prepped for writing this mess not by reading and playing the source material, but instead took their best stab at winning the Guinness Book of World Records title for most Tide Pods consumed. Honestly, I found myself pitying the writers. They don't know what they've missed out on. Like lots of you, I have fond memories of late-night co-op campaign run-throughs of the original trilogy with my younger brothers, wherein we struck down the Covenant Scourge and sent them packing. We fought and died together, a lot, against the odds, and on dozens of planets, starships, military bases. We persevered and risked academic probation in some cases in order to get the games finished. And those memories are something the IP assassins at Paramount will never be able to take away. That said, the Winter Wolf is not a forgiving sort, and for that I have to charge this cinematic late-term abortion of a series with 9 counts of IP molestation in the first degree. These dipshits proudly proclaimed prior to the series launch that they hadn't played the games personally or read the books and extended lore. They'd reported that they'd had conversations with those that did, and more or less felt that secondhand exposure to the world of Halo would suffice for their purposes. They didn't think the story from the game could be done on the small screen, so they were just going to build their own from the ground up.
Sheer fucking hubris.
There isn't enough bleach in this or any world to rinse this uninspired, misinformed, misguided, and ultimately massive disappointment shit stain of a series out of my eyes. Maybe for Season 2, because of course Season 2 has already been greenlit, I'll switch back over to good old-fashioned open flame, or holy water, or some silver-infused buckshot. If there was any justice in the world, the team of douche-nozzle hack writers at Paramount would be expecting a Covenant glassing any second now, for what they've done to this vaunted franchise. But alas, it seems like it falls to we brave few. If you're a Halo fan and stuck around to finish this lukewarm, tasteless shitburger like I did, there's probably a good chance you've ground your teeth down to bloody gums and run through a few bottles of extra-strength Tylenol. You probably also contributed mightily to your local packy. And who the hell can blame you? This show is capital G garbage. This box full of unwashed donkey dick was a slog to get through. An absolute snooze fest of weak plotting, extraneous subplots, awful characterizations, and missed opportunities. The writers made the same mistakes so many other crews make when they seized the reins to famous franchises. You inherited a ready-made for success IP with a ravenous for content, passionate, and knowledgeable fanbase, eager to consume the next franchise offering in a neat little bow-tied gift box, and then chucked it off a bridge like some psychopath getting rid of an unwanted box of puppies. For a show about a hostile group of alien zealots seeking to cleanse the universe of humanity's stain, and honestly, can I even really blame them at this point given the current state of things? Being opposed by a group of genetically enhanced super soldiers representing humanity's only hope for survival is a glaring lack of either. Apparently, getting a Covenant appearance, or Spartans doing cool Spartan shit, is tougher to score than Weekend Getaway with Scarlett Johansson. But hey, a wolf can dream, can't he? Instead of Halo resembling anything one might have expected from the games, minus the names of certain characters and locations, we get a show that honestly reminded me of the same kind of crap I stopped watching on the CW years ago. This show didn't need to be the peak of grimdark like Walking Dead or anything, but a show about a desperate struggle should have frontline said struggle, not relegated to the background noise soft enough to put an insomniac to sleep. And that's exactly what we got. Multiple episodes of not Master Chief having a completely out of character existential crisis. Valuable screen time that could have been spent world building, showcasing the Spartans' incredible abilities, and bringing the game's heroic main character's signature dry sense of humor to the small screen.
Permission to leave the station.
For what purpose, Master Chief?
To give the Covenant back their bomb.
Completely avoided. Instead, the screen time was squandered, bringing an unnecessarily overwrought backstory to life. Nobody asked how Master Chief came to be. He was always just the eponymous hero, ready on a moment's notice to gear up and go to work. He's not the sort of character that needed a hero's journey, the same way characters like James Bond, Sherlock Holmes, and Gandalf don't need him. They are who they are. They react to the challenges of the world around them and take us along for the ride. The real Master Chief doesn't need inner demons to contend with. He didn't need absentee parents or to have been passed over for squad leader at boot or been jilted at the altar by a runaway bride. He's not that guy. None of that remotely means that he needs to be an emotionless drone either. There's nothing about the Chief in-game that makes him come across as a fish out of water or as a being that doesn't understand emotions or humanity. This is where the series creates the first of those 4 fatal mistakes. They transform the Master Chief fundamentally from a stoic, capable, even-keeled soldier to an increasingly unstable, incompetent, self-centered twat waffle. By literally copy-pasting Lieutenant Commander Data's character arc from Star Trek The Next Generation and the Next Generation film and slapping the Chief's armor over him, you wind up with a wildly different character than the one most of the fans wanted to see. We didn't get the super soldier standing against humanity's certain doom. We got a brainwashed, emotionally inhibited drone who needs to contend with the sudden consequences of what it means to feel human. And they did this in the most ridiculous, cringe-inducing way imaginable, stripping the Chief of his helmet, then his armor, and then finally his dignity. That's the second fatal mistake right here. The show seems incapable of recognizing and establishing the stakes necessary to make a plot compelling. The UNSC is quite aware the Covenant exists prior to Episode 1, having lost multiple colonies, and somehow suppressing that truth from the rest of the galaxy. With a mere 9 episodes to play with, the writers should have treated the UNSC like they were on the clock, moments away from a pivotal final battle. We know the Covenant are actively looking for humanity to eradicate them, but for some reason, we have plenty of time for Master Chief to stroll down memory lane in every episode, trying to solve the mystery of his stolen youth. There's too many to list in this video, but trust and believe the number of scenes involving the Chief looking at the artifact, drawing pictures of the artifact, and actually touching the damn thing number in the dozens. All the while, the writers are neglecting everything that made the original Halo trilogy the success that it is. Master Chief engaging with Cortana as they fight the Covenant. Which brings us to the third fatal mistake, Cortana herself. Introducing her in Episode 3 and in a role antagonistic to the Chief would be like reworking Samwise into a thorn in Frodo's side instead of his closest unyielding ally. She was never a creation of Halsey's or an agent operating under her control. There wasn't a mistrust between her and the Chief, and their friendship was strengthened as the games went on, until the mess that is current-day Halo. This should have been played up from minute 1 as sort of a buddy cop duo. Cortana should have been with John, on mission, acting as a buffer to his stoic bullheadedness, an instinct to shoot first, and 100% not as some weird spy for Halsey. Here's that fourth fatal mistake. Everything Quan. What exactly did this subplot do for the larger Halo story? Quan survives the Madrigal massacre, gets sent to live with Sorin, gets it in her head that it's her responsibility to liberate Madrigal from Vintergrath's authoritarian control, and then manages to do so because she stumbles across a clan of firebenders in the middle of the fucking desert? Holy hell, it's like these dipshits wrote this shit week to week after devouring a 40-pack of those aforementioned Tide Pods. None of this storyline was necessary. None of it circled back to, referenced, or impacted the larger story in any way. In fact, it did worse than that. It wasted a couple of episodes when you add it all together, and it completely squandered a very compelling character. Sorin basically amounted to the Finn from Star Wars sequel trilogy of the Halo series. He had an interesting setup as an AWOL Spartan recruit, an interesting current situation as a pirate boss in Halo's equivalent of the Outer Rim from Star Wars, and a wide array of story choices the writers could have pursued. And what did they do? They made him a fucking babysitter. No shade on Bokeem Woodbine, I loved his performance. And had it been me dealing with Quan's mopey entitled ass, I'd have shot her. Or strangled her with my mutant Sorin hand at the very least.
Her hand!
Oh, my other hand isn't strong enough. You take my little hand.
No! Get it away from me!
And all the while, this shit's wasting our time. Nobody on Madrigal seems to be like, holy shit, what the hell were those blue and purple dudes that just smoked our outpost? What a crock of shit. The show makes a bunch of other mistakes, and I'm sure plenty of people would consider some of them fatal, maybe even top among them. The show makes a bunch of other mistakes, and I'm sure plenty of people would consider some of them fatal, top among them being Chief's de-helmeting early and often. Seriously, would it have killed you fuckers to just not show his face after removing the helmet? Way to kill the mysteriousness of the character, you dickheads. The other honorable mention fatal mistake is Mckee. I'm in the minority here. I don't rate her as being a massive mistake. Sure, in the real Halo timeline, the Covenant would 100% never have had a human in any sort of exalted position. But in this mess, they actually had a specific reason for needing her. Make no mistake, it was contrived garbage they tried adding to the lore, but I'll let it slide. But I could see where enough people were definitely pissed off that they included her at all. Most of the other mistakes stem from a lack of verisimilitude. Nothing in this show feels authentic. Every time something not wholly invented by the series shows up, it feels like the writers just winged every piece they wrote. There's a clear lack of understanding on how the military chain of command works, how a JAG interview would work, on biology and with medical techniques, and even how basic physics work from time to time. This all seems par for the course these days, I'm afraid. Showrunners and their winged IP assassinating monkey writers are entirely too comfortable taking established heroes and deconstructing them into oblivion. I mean past the nuts and bolts and right down to the short and curlies. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for proper character development, but the development's supposed to flow intertwined with the plot's progression, and not drag it to a screeching halt. That's what we get here. All the while, we know there's a danger out there amongst the stars, searching for our home, eager to destroy us, and we're watching not Master Chief go on walks in the park with potential spies. The series wasn't the place to have some bizarre off-brand character study into a character who never needed it all spelled out. And if you really had your heart set on telling that story, you had two glaringly obvious choices you could have gone with. Number one, you could have just written it and called it anything but Halo. Nothing given in the show required the brand. This could have been a completely original story, and it probably would have been better received that way, despite the awful writing. Or second, barring the previous superior choice, if you really wanted to give us this deep cut into not Master Chief's backstory, you should have gone all in. Eliminate Quan's pointless arc and give us a balanced 10-episode series where Master Chief's search for his stolen past is balanced and juxtaposed against the constant danger of the Covenant threat. And that could have been done in a number of ways. One of the compelling ones could have been making the other Spartans actual characters instead of just props. Maybe Vanek doesn't care what happened in the past. Maybe he's fine with things as is and understands its purpose. Maybe Kai quits after de-chipping herself and goes rogue to find the original defector Sorin. Eliminating Quan would have given the Spartans more time to work and play off each other, and it would have been even particularly nice to see them in situations featuring a Covenant conflict in tight spaces. That kind of heightened conflict really brings out the interpersonal dynamics, and that kind of bond amongst a small squad is exactly what people wanted to see. Instead of taking Master Chief down the path of Pinocchio becoming a real boy, they could have given us a Master Chief questioning his loyalty to Halsey in a way that didn't portray him as an emotionally stunted jackass. If you wanted to pursue the UNSC versus colony separatist story, you should have dropped the Spartans on Madrigal and had them fight alongside the colonists after initially having them at odds, and on screen. Nothing screams common ground like realizing you have a common enemy intent on wiping both of you out. These starting points create interesting launch pads for the Chief to interact with Halsey and Cortana. After the conflict flows, it puts Chief at odds with Keyes and Paragonsky, and if executed properly, could have created all kinds of interesting drama as Chief deals with his conflicting loyalties and the debilitating effects of touching the Keystone. If they really wanted to ramp this conflict up, they could have had the UNSC Council order the Spartans to destroy a Covenant site, only to find it staffed by human slave labor. They could have had the Spartan units struggle to remain cohesive after one of them died during a firefight, or had disagreements regarding their orders. Instead, we get a Halo series that feels like it would have been more at home on the CW, like I said before. None of the constant low-effort dialogue or melodrama deliver any real punch, and that's a shame. Halo is a war story at its core, and a war story is filled with dramatic tales of grief, loss, fear, hope, rage, and searches for redemption and peace told by the civilians, the wounded, refugees, survivors, frontline combatants, the Covenant, co-conspirators, spies, and even Cortana herself. Any of these concepts would have yielded compelling story scenarios. Propping these ideas up could have been significant framing questions. Who are the Covenant? Why do they hate us? How has humanity developed socially and culturally in the 25th century? In a battle for survival, does a ruling government have a duty to suspend personal and territorial freedoms? Is it wrong to sacrifice the few for the many? Can we sufficiently trust AI to hand over total control of our infrastructure and defenses to them? Do we even have the right to explore and colonize space? What if we reached out to the stars and they told us to stay home? We have all these questions and more, but instead we get, why are the UNSC the biggest bunch of collective idiots alive? Why do they not function remotely like an actual navy? Why do they lack basic security protocols? Why hasn't the Chief used his signature weapon for more than a split second? And why is he always needing a rescue? Why isn't Cortana? Why are there awkward nudity and sex scenes in Halo? Why is Quan here? Why is firebending part of Halo? How has nobody remanded an obviously compromised and declining Master Chief into custody? And here's just a few more for funsies. Why haven't we had any development for half of the Spartans? What exactly was Miranda good for in this show? Why have the Covenant mostly be a non-issue for 7.5 episodes? Why are the colonists not trampling over each other to gain UNSC protection after the Madrigal attack? Did nobody in the Capitol on Madrigal realize what happened at the refinery? Nobody checked it out and saw alien fucking carcasses there? Wouldn't Venture Graftsmen have at least sent a team to salvage Covenant tech for use or resale? Instead, we get massive inconsistencies in the plot, ranging from basics, like how time and distance are largely ignored during travel, all the way through massive plot-breaking contrivances. Case in point, in the final episode, the UNSC locates the planet Mckee, operating then as a double agent, had given up that supposedly was the site of a Covenant holy site. The problem is she gave up the location before she actually had her moment of weakness and hooked up with 40-year-old virgin Master Chief. Why in the hell would she have actually given them reliable intel at that point? There wasn't a Covenant trap waiting there. She actually pointed them to a well-hidden religious secret that had been hiding in plain sight. And then in the big finale, surprise, surprise, Cortana saves the day, not the Chief relying on his years of experience and training. Cortana. For some reason, he needs to take the beating of a lifetime before she can take over his body and do all the cool Master Chief shit we've been waiting on for 9 episodes, and then call down the dropship for the last second air support. Like, why the Halo didn't you just use the dropship to gun the Covenant down in the first place? The Chief getting his brains beaten in is stupid as well in that scene. He didn't need to die for Cortana to take over. Hell, she didn't even need his consent. If he'd been mangled by a fucking great white shark, Cortana couldn't have just taken over and gone about her business. He'd still be fucking mangled. And this is the problem with this show, guys. Even if you accept it as a different Halo, it can still be judged by its own merits. And when you do, none of it makes sense. The stories is always a blind step ahead of itself and stumbles forward without paying any attention to ensure even basic logic is maintained. That's Halo in a nutshell, I guess. A brainless, heartless, soulless mess that fumbled around in the dark and then went out with a whimper. Not exactly the outing most of us have been hoping for. Sadly, we can add this IP to the depressingly long and still growing list of franchises and fandoms, whose modern writers seem to just fundamentally misunderstand. This carcass is best left untouched. Besides, the Winter Wolf would be hunting larger, more dangerous game this week. And that's all I got on this one, guys. Thanks a lot for checking it out. Stay tuned for more. Next up on my agenda is Obi-Wan on Disney Plus, starting I think it's May 27th. I'll see you then.